Hello again. We are Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 16 here to preview the opening game of the college football season for both Georgia and Clemson. That will take place in Atlanta, noon Eastern kickoff, August 31st. We are doing this on August the 2nd. So if there's any information that's out of date, injuries, things like that, please forgive us. We cannot see the future. But we could tell you we're very excited about seeing two very good football teams play in Atlanta, Chase.
We are, and this is a rematch from that 2021 matchup between these two teams, where the only touchdown scored was a pick six by Georgia. The Bulldogs won it 10-3 to start the season that year, and so it's been a good matchup in the past. I imagine it will be again this year. So we'll dive into that in just a second. But let's talk about Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website today to get in on the action. And you can use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here.
Let's talk about both these teams briefly, then I'll get into offense. I mean, both teams coming off somewhat disappointing seasons. And I know that sounds silly when Georgia lost one game a year ago and just beat the tar out of Florida State in a bowl game that should have an asterisk next to it. But in any case, Clemson on its side of things, 9-4. That's the most losses they've had in Clemson in a while. But to note, two of those were in overtime. One of those at NC State. That they came off that Duke game to start last year. We're all going, what was that? But it feels like both these teams returning more towards where they used to. Maybe not Clemson as much. Clemson is ranked 15-ish in the polls. I think probably is where they're going to settle. That's what I'm seeing preseason. Georgia, the presumptive preseason number one team, but again, lost to Alabama in the SEC title game and did not make the playoffs. Very interested in seeing the reset for both these teams. Let's start with Clemson's offense. Cade Klubnik, their quarterback, is talented, was a little inconsistent a year ago, 19 touchdowns, 9 picks. Phil Mafah, their running back, returns at a two-headed running back room, one to the NFL. They've got a receiving and a tight end room that I think they feel are as good as they've had in a while. And I think they returned 4 out of 5 offensive linemen, the Tigers.
They do. I like their offense. It looks good. And Garrett Riley coming into his second year as offensive coordinator is something else to mention as well. He's a great offensive coordinator. And so I like where their offense sits. I mean, Cade Klubnik, like you mentioned last year, a little inconsistent, 64% completion rate there, threw for 2,844 yards. He took his hits and lumps in first year as a quarterback. Several games ended up losses because they just couldn't finish. He couldn't get them down the field in those clutch moments. And so, but he's had time to improve, to work on that. But yeah, I think they've really upgraded their wide receiver room. That is for sure. I really like Tyler Brown. He had 52 catches last year. They really work at a tight end as well with Jake Brimmingstool, who had 50 catches. He'll lead the way there. And then some freshman receivers as well, and Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore coming in. And this is one team that in Clemson that you don't have to worry about learning any transfer portal guys, but a lot of high school guys coming in to step up. And so they've got those two guys who will be joining the ranks there. And they returned 5 of their top 7 receivers. Antonio Williams, another one of those guys who missed some time due to injuries, but he led the team in 2022 with 56 receptions. And so he's a guy to watch. But yeah, I like what they've done with their wide receiver room and the way it looks. And then you mentioned Phil Mafah as well. He's a workhorse. He was the leading rusher last year, 965 yards, 13 touchdowns. And of course they lost Will Shipley from last year. So Mafah's the guy. He's the dude that's going to be carrying the ball a lot. And And I think he's a great guy that you want carrying the football for you. So I like the skill guys that Clemson has.
Yeah, it was a little bit more of a ball control offense, maybe than an explosive one for the Tigers last year. If I'm reading this right, 5.2 yards per play. That's a little bit out of step with 29.8 points per game. It means they were
Yeah.
probably pretty efficient, which you're going to need to be against Georgia. My goodness. Georgia's got 5 guys on this defense that I've seen getting some preseason All-American love. Michael Williams at defensive end, Nazir Stackhouse in the middle of that defensive line. Munden at linebacker. In the secondary, you got Dalen Everett and Malachi Starks getting some All-American love. This is a team that's got a lot of guys back that contributed, the Warren Brinsons and the Chaz Chamblises who don't get that All-American, All-SEC type love, but have played a lot of ball for Kirby Smart. Looks like Kirby Smart has cooked up another elite defense down in Athens.
He has. It's remarkable. And anytime Kirby Smart coaches a team, you know they're going to have a good defense. But yeah, it's the defensive line is so strong. The corners, I think, are in a good position. Linebacker, the whole defense is really good, and so much experience. I feel like on this Georgia defense, and that's what really stands out to me is a lot of games to be played. When you look up and down the roster for Georgia's defense. And so this offense that Georgia will see in Clemson is not anything unlike what they're going to see in the SEC as well. Like this is a good offense for Clemson, but this is what they're going to see a lot of weeks in SEC play as well, because there's some really good offenses in the SEC. And so I think this will be a good test for Georgia right off the bat, like facing a dynamic offense. And so, but this defense, just looking at them on paper, again, we'll see how they respond to it when they play on the field. But on paper, this defense is nothing but ready for what they're going to see this season.
Georgia's offense projected to be one of the top ones in the country again. Carson Beck, the quarterback, the presumptive Heisman favorite, coming off his first year as a starter, which he was fantastic. 24 touchdowns, 6 picks. They got Trevor Etienne transferring in from Florida. Clemson fans know that last name. As we do this, Ra Thomas has been kicked off the team, but they've got a deep and experienced receiving room. Dillon Bell, Dominic Lovett, Miami transfer Colbie Young. They lose Brock Bowers at tight end, but that offensive line, 4 of Georgia's 5 offensive linemen have gotten some All-American love in the preseason from somewhere. And boy, you could just be ordinary at the other spots with that offensive line and be fine. And that is the scary thing about facing this Georgia offense, among other things.
They're so good. You mentioned especially up front, and I like what they've done. And it's a lot of, again, I talked about experience on the defense. There's a lot of experience on the offensive line as well. Guys who have played at Georgia will be starting, who've been there. They've done that. They may not have played a ton of games, but they've been in some meaningful games. And so, and yeah, and then you look at the skill guys. The receiving room is so deep. You've got a quarterback in Carson Beck, who's probably the best in the country. And this is probably the best offense in the country. Trevor Etienne is a great addition to this offense to run the ball. They're just so deep in every position, I feel like. And, I mean, we're talking about the championship level roster when you talk about Georgia. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it until they prove me wrong. This is a championship type roster that Georgia has, especially offensively.
Well, speaking of reloading, feels like that's what Clemson does on defense every year. And they lost a bunch of guys. I'm looking at Athlon, and they've only got, 2 returning starters. And yet Phil Steele says, and I'll quote him, "I feel they've got the best defense in the ACC this year," which is what happens when you recruit and retain talent. We know that Dabo Swinney does not like to go heavy in the portal. Secondary seems to be the question for Clemson, but they're always good in the front 7. They lose draft picks, but they replace them with the guys that'll be draft picks one day. And so this will be no easy challenge for Georgia.
Yeah, 5 guys they lost to the draft from last year, and so they had to change things up a lot. I feel like on the offense. But one guy they're really high on, a younger guy, linebacker Sammy Brown, top defensive recruit from Clemson's class. You got him. You got Peter Woods, defensive lineman as well, and T.J. Parker, some of the top 2 freshman defenders in the entire country, and they're all on that defensive front together. I think is really big for Clemson, and so they've had to kind of focus on some different positions because of the amount of guys left. It wasn't all from one spot; they were really spread out, and so again, the secondary lost their top 2 players from last year, and so they've had to rely on guys like Avion Terrell. He really proved himself last year as a freshman. You got Khalil Barnes. He's really quick. He does a good job there in the secondary, and R.J. Mickens as well has played a lot of football. They're not super deep, but they do have some talent there that will definitely enhance the defense for Clemson.
Yeah, special teams were kind of an issue for Clemson a year ago. The kicking game was kind of a nightmare. They've got a new kicker, Nolan Hauser, who hit 66 field goals in high school. That says that's a national record. I would presume that's for a career. That's a lot of field goals for a high school.
That's a lot
kicker.
of field goals. Yes, it is.
You don't ever know how that's going to translate, but we'll see, especially in an environment in game 1 that'll be intense to say the least. Georgia's special teams kind of go overlooked, but they bring back Peyton Woodring, who is dependable, hit every point after. Brett Thorson, their punter, who's really good, kind of goes overlooked because they don't punt a lot. So Georgia would feel like it's got an edge in special teams. And frankly, Chase, I just would have a hard time picking against the Bulldogs. They're about 13-point favorites in terms of the line. Looking at some computer stuff that we follow, SP Plus, ESPN's FPI, our friend Kelly Ford, that's got Georgia more like a 15-point favorite. I'm not necessarily endorsing one or the other. I'm just saying that's the perception. Clemson's a really good team. There's about 16 teams that I look at that in terms of talent project to be playoff teams. Clemson is all in that mix, although at the back end of it, Georgia firmly at the front end of it. All that to say, this is a time when parity, we haven't seen it like this in college football for the most part. Georgia's still out ahead of the pack. Look, Clemson's not that far from Atlanta, but Georgia fans are going to be all over Atlanta, and it doesn't really matter where this game's played. I just like Georgia's chances in game 1 with everything it's got coming back.
Oh, I do too. And don't get me wrong, I think Clemson's going to be better than they have the last couple of years. Yeah. I mean, I think they could win the ACC and be in the college football playoff. I think that's what we're dealing with Clemson this year. But I mean, Georgia is just, they're at another level. They are at the top of college football. And again, until they change our minds, that's how it's going to go. And I think Clemson will get a taste of what's to come if they are a playoff team when they play Georgia in game 1 this year. So, yeah, I mean, Georgia has their eye on the college football playoff. They didn't get there last year. It's 12 teams now. They can get in this year. And Georgia's going to be ready to go with this one. I mean, it's a noon Eastern kick in Atlanta. That is prime Georgia territory there. And so, yeah, I definitely like the Bulldogs in this one.
Can't wait to see it. We will have you covered when it's over. We got you covered in SEC football, baseball, and basketball year-round. Yeah, year-round. We've even got a baseball show that we're doing year-round too. Same with basketball. So if you love your SEC and you want the 30,000-foot view of things, we think we do it as well as anybody does. If you want to advertise, we've got an audience in the millions. You can see in the ticker where you can send your inquiries. Anyway, for Chase Robinson, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.